first met you and when I first met Meg. Seems like a long time ago now. And I just love when our alumni start changing the world. It's such an exciting thing as a teacher. It's such a validation for what we do. And that's really my mission, is how do we train the next generation of nutrition professionals to really think in a clear way and to take this profession and really make it bigger and better. So I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you.
Well, something I was thinking about today, um, while I was walking the dog and looking at beautiful nature, I was thinking about the first time I read your book. And the first time I read your book, I was in graduate school to become something completely different, to become a theater, film, and television director. And I was absolutely miserable. And I was sick. And I read that book, and it really connected for me. And it changed my mind. It changed how I approach food. And I am really, I think, forever grateful for that. And so I have an old version of it, and then I have the new version now on my Kindle. um, and so I am going to open it up for questions, but I would love to just start off with hearing from you. When you first wrote this book, who did you write it for? And when you came out with the fifth edition, who did you come out with that edition for?
I love this question. It's a different one. So I really wrote it the first time for me. And the reason is that when I started to think about this, I was going to conferences in the early 1990s, and Dr. Leo Galland and Dr. Sidney Baker and Dr. Stephen Barry, they were talking about dysbiosis and leaky gut, and these were brand new ideas. And the first stool test had just come out, and I was consulting with an MD with one of his patients, and he said, these tests are going to change all of internal medicine. And that message just came to me, was, wow, I want to know a lot more about this. And there was nothing published. So I went and I just basically said, I want to write a book on leaky gut and dysbiosis. Um, and what's now Genova, which was Great Smoky's lab, Dr. Stephen Barry, he said, oh, well, we'll send you a bunch of things that we have. And what he sent me was cassette tapes of, of conferences. Really, there wasn't anything. And there was, PubMed was brand new, and I was living in Hawaii at the time, and I had little kids, and I had to pay for every single search. So really, the motivation to write this book was because I felt like this is really important. Digestion is really the root of good health. And I want to know more about all of these different aspects of it. And nobody else has put it together. So I started putting it together. And I have to say that the second or third or fourth time that I wrote the book, I was like, it's really a good thing that nobody else was involved in this, because somebody would have said, just choose a niche, right? Like the idea of writing something so encyclopedic was, it never occurred to me that I couldn't, because nobody told me, oh, you need to like have a book that's just like this little niche thing and niche. And so I just kind of wrote it. So really, I wanted to know this. But then people started calling me, specifically. I'd been a nutritionist for a long time, but people started calling me specifically with GI issues and immune issues. And then by the second edition, I felt like, wow, I actually know a lot more. And by the fifth edition, I think really my audience, it's fascinating. My audience is kind of diverse. So it's really still written for a consumer audience. And then it's also being used as a textbook quite a lot. And then clinicians are using it in their offices as a resource. So they're flipping to different sections. Oh, I'm working with somebody with migraines. What does Liz have to say? So it's really, I think it's a broad book, and a lot of different people get use out of it. And you know what you said, Allison, that's why I write. If like one or two or 10 or 100 or however many people, they read it and they go, oh, so that's what's going on, then that's why we write a book, right? Or that's why we do podcasts, or that's why we get our messages out, because it's always about that one person who it changes their direction or it helps them in a way. And that's what's so exciting about all of it. And so that's why I wrote it. And then, there you'll see as you go out there, we all do our work just because we have this passion to do it. And but you'll see that the returns are when people tell you your book changed my life, or your book saved my sister's life, or boy, I took what you wrote into my doctor and we were able to make a different kind of plan. So and I'm saying this not to brag, but to say, if you keep doing what you're doing for 40 years, you're going to have a whole trail of stuff behind you, whether that's from your clinical practice or something you wrote or a video that you made, or your Facebook lives or whatever. You're going to touch people in these same ways.
Oh, that's thank you so much for that answer. I think that is just such a beautiful way to kick off our conversation tonight. So I'd love to invite everyone, if you have a question for Liz, if you could type it in the chat box. And I have our team's help in terms of making sure that we're going to address the questions as we have time for them. So if you could kindly share in the chat box, and if we can't quite um, grasp your question from the chat box, we will ask you to unmute and to clarify kindly. So while you're all typing your questions in the chat box, I am curious, this is another broad question. How do you feel like the landscape has changed in nutrition science since the fourth edition? What do you feel like has been some of the biggest changes or things that you considered while writing the book?
So the fourth edition came out in 2012. That's 8 years. That's a lot of change. And the biggest areas that I think that we have changes in are one, our understanding of the microbiome and the microvirome, and the roles that they play in health and disease. I think also some of the other areas is that we have more about the autoimmune conditions. We have more about the role of GI health in bone issues. We have also really deepened our understanding of gut barrier function or increased intestinal permeability. And then something that was brand new is the whole idea, or I shouldn't say brand new, but it's really expanded the whole gut brain, the whole enteric nervous system, and what we know about it, and the concept of psychobiotics. Also, since then, my ideas and the research on prebiotics have really revolutionized my ideas about how I live my everyday life with probiotic and prebiotic rich foods, and the kinds of foods that I make myself has changed. And then the underlying research has mushroomed. There's just so much more of it. And so looking at kind of the backup on, food reactions, celiac disease, gluten intolerance, the backup on specifics on IBS. I mean, when you think about like the low FODMAP diet in 2012, we had pretty much no research. When you look at the specific carbohydrate diet, we had no research. Paleoimmune, it didn't even exist hardly. And so, really we have had a turnover of information. I think it was Dr. Jeffrey Bland a long time ago. He said, right now there's data. The increase in data right now is exponential. It's somewhere like every 10 to 30 days, the amount of data that we have doubles, except that the amount of real clinical information that we have, it might take 2 or 3 years to get that same kind of doubling of information. And so one of the fun things for me about writing is that, and teaching, is that I get to sit in PubMed like a nerd that I am. And some of you are laughing and smiling because you are also that same kind of nerd, that you just love exploring the research and seeing what's new.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great segue. Paula just shared a wonderful question. While I've read Liz's book and taken her course at MUH, I still find I get easily overwhelmed with where to start with clients who have GI or other issues that I suspect originate in the gut. Any advice for new practitioners, specifically on that overwhelm? I think that overwhelm point that we can all probably relate to.
So, one of my teachers, um, who's a physician, what he said, Michael, I'm blanking out on his name right now. It's been a really long day of Zoom calls. Anyway, Dr. David Jones from IFM, what he said is, when I walk into do a patient consult and I feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to be the expert and I have to know everything, then I feel overwhelmed. But when I walk into that room and I meet the person where they am and I know that we have a partnership, then I know everything will go really well. And so I think for overwhelm, all you need to really know is a little bit more than your client who you're sitting with, right?
Mm.
And if you ask them enough questions, they will give you a huge amount of information that you can start to sort. And so, um, you know, so what you want to do is listen. And I always tell people, I go, I'm really nosy. I like to, ask you a lot of questions because I'm trying to really figure out who you are and how we got here, and and how we can like build a ladder to get you out of this hole that you fell into. So, I make a relationship and then I start thinking about what I do know. And I think that as nutritionists, we sit in the really sweet spot of healthcare because we have the time to really ask somebody all these questions. We have the time to be curious. We can hold people's hands. And we don't have the big responsibility of like missing cancer or MS or, these enormous kind of responsibilities that physicians have. We also have, with use of food and sleep and movement and sense of meaning and purpose and talking with people about their relationships, um, and the use of supplements and herbs, we're not doing chemotherapy. So we're not going to really hurt people. Um, if somebody goes, I start taking the supplement and my tummy feels really weird, you're just going to go, well, why don't you stop taking it for a few days and let's start again more gradually and see what happens, right? Because maybe we did exactly the right thing, but just too much too fast. So it's one of those things where when I first got into practice, the brand new exciting things, and you're all going to laugh, were PMS, which doctors were treating with Valium. Oh, honey, just calm down and it'll all be okay, right? And the other thing was hypoglycemia. It was a brand new idea of this transient blood sugar issue. And the third thing, when I was first in practice, was that one of my clients came to me and she goes, I'm an emotional eater and I want you to work with me. And I read this book that she had read called Fat is a Feminist Issue. And I went, oh my gosh, you're like most of my other clients. And I started running groups for emotional overeaters. And so those are my three main things. And, I would say if you can pick just a niche when you start, and just like one area that you say, well, I feel confident. I have little kids, so I feel really good about working with pregnant and nursing moms, or people who have small children, or I have X issue and I've been working on this for a long time. I would start promoting yourself in something that you feel comfortable in, and then start branching out, because what's going to happen is you're going to say, I'm just going to work with people who have migraines, right? I'm going to take this area as my own. And then you're going to kind of work successfully with someone, and they're going to send their spouse or their best friend to see you, and that person's going to have something that is different. And the next thing you know, you're going to have a huge clientele that all have breast cancer, because you worked successfully with somebody who had breast cancer in helping them go through whatever area that they were in. And so your practice is going to grow incrementally, but I would say kind of start small with a couple areas that you feel really confident in. The other thing that I want to say is a couple of things. One is, what I'm seeing is that what I'm seeing in the students when they're bringing cases is that when people pay out of pocket to come see us, often by the time they come see us, they have really complex health issues that can feel really overwhelming. And and when you take insurance and you are an insurance provider, you're going to start seeing people that have less complex health issues many times. But the difference is that they might be a lot less motivated to follow your suggestions. What I found when I was in practice, when people paid out of pocket, that they were really willing to do almost anything that I suggested. So there's kind of a balance to all of that. And anyway, so that's kind of for the overwhelm. Like, start with things and write blog posts on things and try to attract people to an area that you're really comfortable in. And and sometimes you don't have to be the smartest person. You just have to be a little bit more knowledgeable or able to see the pattern recognition better than the person you're working with. And do ask them about those antecedents, triggers, and mediators. Look at their timeline, use a timeline to try to think about what's really going on, as they move through, because there's lots of times there's a big clue there.
Thank you. I think that is excellent advice about being curious, seeking out what feels familiar with your niche and really jumping in and going for it. That is awesome. Well, we've got lots of wonderful questions here. So I think that there's a question that came in that I'd love to ask. It seems like a good segue question. From Shari, do you believe in the 5R protocol for approaching gut wellness, or do you have another approach that you prefer? And I'd like to also add on to that question. I just have been dying to hear the origin story of the Diggin model. I don't know if you call it Digin. I keep reading it. When I read it, I read Diggin in my head. So
Too.
yeah, okay. Because I saw you mention in the book that the 5R protocol came from Jeff Bland and Metagenics, and then IFM added the extra R. So with your work as well. So I'd love to hear the origin story of that and what kind of approach you prefer now.
Well, I really find I love the 5Rs, and I also love the dig in. The dig in model is really, how do we assess what's going on and the root issues with somebody with digestive issues or complicated health issues. And then the 5Rs is really how we approach treating that person, so, from our viewpoint as nutritionists. So, and I know there's a couple herbalists on the call too. So the origin of the dig in model, which I'll tell you a little bit about, was that I was sitting in an airport with Dr. Patrick Hanaway, and he said to me, we're on our way to a conference, and he said, I think there's only really 5 underlying mechanisms of why people have digestive issues. And and he said that to me, and I kind of took it all in. And then over the next few days, I started working on acronyms. And we And I presented him. I said, well, it could be dig in or dig it, you know? And so we decided dig in. And what the dig in model is first we want to look and see how well is somebody digesting their food and absorbing their food. So do they have, are they chewing it? Do they have enough digestive enzymes? Do they have enough stomach acid? Do they have too much stomach acid? What's their motility like? Are they having 3 bowel movements a week? Are they having 1 bowel movement a week? You know, looking at that digestion and absorption and the motility. The first I in the model is intestinal permeability, and we can talk more about that. But you know, intestinal permeability, this gut barrier function, is so important for maintaining that crucial kind of barrier between the inside of the gut lumen, where we're digesting food, and moving molecules into the bloodstream. And so if the barrier is leaky, then we get all kinds of garbage that gets into the bloodstream that then the immune system has to jump in and deal with. So that's the first I. The G in the dig-in model is the gut microbiome, which is, you know, tons of talks all by itself. And then the next I is inflammation and immune. So we start with inflammation, and then we, if that keeps going on over periods of time, we end up with an immune reaction. And so we can have inflammation and immune issues kind of all the way through the gut, from the tongue all the way down through our bottom. So looking at that and looking at autoimmune conditions and their role, and then and ulcerative colitis and Crohn's and gastritis and kind of all the inflammation that can happen. And then the N is the gut brain, the enteric nervous system, and the vagal nerve function and all of that. And so when you're working with somebody with GI issues or complex health issues, if you're working with somebody with a lot of really complex issues, you want to back away and say, okay, let's start with the gut. You know, let's just start there. And so what you want to do is you want to go, well, is somebody digesting and absorbing and moving their food well? Do I think that leaky gut plays a role? What about, do they have dysbiosis? Maybe do they have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or fungal overgrowth or parasites? Or what do I think's going on with their microbiome? And then, are they inflamed? Do they have immune issues? And finally, is it affecting their brain? What's their gut brain doing? Are they depressed? Are they anxious? Do they have diagnosis of schizophrenia? And how does that all work in? And it's not just most people are going to have 2 or 3 of those, but you're going to have to make a decision, like, where do we want to start and what's the biggest bang for the buck, right? So that's when after you've thought through that, then you want to start thinking about the 5 R's. And so the first thing that's really in our control is that first one, remove, right? What is causing this inflammation? It's likely to be food, because the average American is eating 71.9% of their food as ultra processed food, according to a recent study. And food is the most inflammatory thing we do every day. So we want to start thinking about what to remove, but also, are they living in a situation that's untenable? Do you need to change that, right? Do they have a job they hate? Do they have a spouse they hate, right? You know, so what needs to go or change in that person's life? Do they have mold in their house? Well, maybe that needs to go, right? So think about what needs to go, and then what do we replace that with? And we generally start thinking about digestive enzymes and do they need more stomach acid, and what do we want to replace that diet with that we just removed? What kind of protocol are we going to recommend? So you start thinking about that, and then we want to re-inoculate. So we want to think first about prebiotics and probiotic rich foods, and then we might want to think about prebiotic or probiotic supplements as well. Then we want to start thinking about repair. You know, so I start thinking about things like DGL licorice if there's upper GI inflammation, or L-glutamine or quercetin or colostrum or some of the kind of immunoglobulin products that are on the market now. And so we want to start thinking about repair, and we might want to start thinking about bone broths and things like that, and demulcent foods. And then finally, the fifth R was one that I came up with and presented to IFM. And I think my definition of it is uh, it's twofold. And so the way that it's being interpreted by many people is about rebalance, and it's about kind of rebalancing that parasympathetic nervous system, doing the things that give us joy and pleasure. Where's that balance? Today, I really have sat at this computer on Zoom pretty much all day, but I had like an hour and a half break, and I just went, okay, I am out of here. And I just went for a walk, and it did not rain, but it was about to, and it was just beautiful to get out for an hour and just kind of have that balance back in my life, right? So, how do you rebalance? Do you play a musical instrument? Do you get in the kitchen at the end of the day and you cook? Do you read at night? I read novels at night because I don't want to read nutrition at night, right? And, how do you fill your cup back up? And the other part of the rebalance, and what I was really thinking about as one of the major parts, is what's somebody's new normal? So, for example, somebody who's been sick for a really long time has often built their whole world around being sick. Their friends are know them as being sick. Their relationships are about them being sick. And what happens when suddenly they're feeling great? That's their new normal. And even though it's fantastic, everything changes, right? So, how did they come to balance from being an ill person to now being a well person, right? Or somebody who's always been fat and suddenly they're thin, right? And then it goes the other way. I mean, you can have in an instant find out from a doctor, oh, the reason why you've been feeling XYZ is because you have this horrible disease that we have to deal with, or you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And you're like, oh, what's that? Oh my God, right? And so you start thinking about, okay, this is my new normal. I need to do a lot more self care. I need to really look at this and take notice. And so our lives can shift on a dime. I remember a day when I got a diagnosis of something and I went, whoa, isn't that fascinating? Yesterday I didn't have this, today I do. And I think, so all of this is part of that fifth R, that rebalance. And so, yes, I still use these. I think they're really useful, like to try to figure out what's going on. And then how are we going to approach this person? And, food is our most powerful weapon for, I shouldn't say weapon, our most powerful tool for moving people from an inflammatory state to an anti-inflammatory state, for balancing the microbiome, for getting the biggest results the fastest. And for those of you who've been in practice for even a little bit of time, you know that the right dietary plan for a person at the right moment can shift them dramatically in 2 weeks. You see it all the time. And it's so gratifying because somebody walks into your office and they're like, yes, I'm feeling great and I'm willing to keep doing this because I'm feeling so much better. And so, I think these are really important tools for us to really use and think about as underlying kind of mechanisms of what's going on, dig in, and how do I approach this from a nutritional level with the 5 Rs.
Thank you. Let's talk about dig in the 5 Rs specifically with SIBO. We've got a great question from Erica on it. It sounds like she's seeing a lot more SIBO in her patients this year, and writes, my personal assumption is the higher stress levels of 2020 is significantly impacting this. But I'm curious if you're seeing more SIBO patients and if you have any new insights into treating and most importantly preventing reoccurrence of SIBO.
Okay, so I'm not in practice anymore because I have to have a life and sleep and do all those things. So I'm not in practice, and I'm really devoting myself to teaching and lecturing and writing and, all of those fun things, and spending time with my husband and my family, and or not spending time with my family because they can't come over for Thanksgiving. But anyway, so that makes me sad, but I get it. I'll spend time with a few of them one night, and then a couple days later we'll do another Thanksgiving. So here in Oregon, we cannot not have gatherings of more than 6 people right now, and um, so anyway, that's kind of what's going on. Anyway, so SIBO, yes, I do think stress plays a huge role in SIBO. Stress plays a huge role in motility. Motility plays a big role in SIBO. And also, gastric acid plays a big role in SIBO. And when we're really stressed, we may not make enough gastric acid. When you think about like the acid in your stomach, it's at a pH of like 1 to 2. It would burn your skin, right? And to make that out of water, you have to concentrate that, you know, a million, more than 10 million, like a million times. It takes a lot of energy to make that stomach acid. And when we don't have enough acid, we open ourselves up to all kinds of dysbiosis, including SIBO. So I think that's one of the mechanisms of why that we're seeing more of it. I also think that we're learning to recognize it better. So we know that from the research that more than half of people who have what's diagnosed as irritable bowel syndrome actually have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So when I was in practice, one of the questions I would ask people is who had IBS, I'd say, do you have a lot of gas and bloating? Do you feel like by the end of the day you need to wear elastic or undo your pants? Because SIBO generally gets worse as the day goes on. And there's certainly a lot of other signs and symptoms, but those are really the big ones, is that it's IBS like gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, some combination of all those, pain with bowel movements, relief after you have one. So looking at all of that. And, in terms of working with somebody who has recurrent SIBO infections. I am working with an old friend of mine right now, and she called me and she said, I need to go see somebody, and I know you're not seeing anybody. I'm like, well, what's going on? And she told me, and here's her story, and let's see what you get from it. But she said, I've had IBS for at least 15 years, and I went in February with my husband and another couple. We went away and we wined and dined. And when I got into the plane to fly home, I went immediately into the bathroom and I stayed there till we landed because I had the runs. And I'm like, okay, well, it sounds like maybe you got food poisoning. And the I talked with her in the afternoon. In that morning, she had done a virtual visit with her doctor who prescribed an antibiotic. And so she started taking those at the same time. And the antibiotic that he recommended wasn't the one that's typically used for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but it's one of the ones that's on the list that could be used. And so immediately I asked her, I said, well, why don't we try a low FODMAP diet, because that's the best diet for this. And I asked her to download the app from the University of Monash in Australia. And this app, it's only a few dollars, but it gives you like green, yellow, red for every single food. And it shows you what category it's in. So if you start saying, wow, all of my problem foods are fructans, but I don't seem to have any problems with lactose, it gives you information about kind of how to move forward. And it puts the power in their phone and in their own hands of figuring it out. So anyway, we reconnected in a couple weeks, and she's like, "Wow, I have not felt this good in decades." But I said, "Okay, this is really good. You took an antibiotic for 10 days, but now I want to order some antimicrobial herbs for you. And I'd like you to start taking these because my guess is that in 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to start having some of your symptoms again." Because somebody who has, like, if she had just had food poisoning, she probably would have bounced back. Most of us have had food poisoning, we bounce right back. But about 25% of people who get food poisoning, it becomes a chronic IBS. And it's called post-infectious IBS. And I would say it's probably not so post-infectious. It's just low grade, that it's just bothering us, but nobody ever bothered to figure out what was going on. And so, now she's about 6 months out in this, and her whole life has changed because she no longer has the IBS, and she's done one 30-day round of herbs, and now she's starting another 30-day round of herbs. And what I know from Dr. Allison Seebecker's work is that when people do breath testing, um, what she'll say is like rifaximin, a round of rifaximin, which is the most commonly used antibiotic, might bring down the hydrogen or methane gas like 50 to 60 points. But if somebody's starting at a level of 200 or 250, you might need a bunch of rounds to get them really down. And so, we see even gastroenterologists and doctors using 6, 7 rounds of these of rifaximin and antibiotics. So I think one, we have to be patient. Two, we have to look at stomach acid and really support that. Three, we might need to give digestive enzymes. We need to also look at really try to figure out which are the trigger foods. And then somebody may even need acupuncture or even structural um, reintegration like acupuncture or osteopathy or chiropractic. There's a small percentage of people with SIBO that it seems like nobody can figure out what's going on, and they need to kind of stay on the herbs long term, maybe at really low levels, or different kinds of probiotics long term. But we're seeing so much small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but I do think we always have to look backwards and go, you couldn't have really gotten this unless you were overdoing on the wrong foods, unless maybe your stomach acid was not adequate, and always have to kind of look back and to try to figure out, is there something we're missing? Is it mold? Is it metals? Is it chemicals? Is it we're always being that sleuth and kind of working backwards. Oh, the link to the app. Let's see. Let me
Oh,
just
we
find
got it in there.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
You know,
Tessa
I
shared it.
yeah, I want to just I don't think I have I'm on airplane mode, but it's a really great app. And there's also a new specific carbohydrate diet app that's free, that you can also download if you're working with that diet.
Have you seen SIBO in someone in a child, like a 10 to 12-year-old?
Yeah. I mean, so this is the thing in kids, we until they can really talk to us, we don't call IBS, we call it RAP, recurring abdominal pain. Um, and and like little kids, they can't really tell you, but they'll just say, "Tummy hurts, mom," "Tummy hurts." Or if they have a lot of gas, you'll see them draped over a sofa or something there, or a table. They're trying to like put pressure on it so that it goes away. And we see just as much IBS in little kids, in children, as we do in adults.
Mhm. I'd love for you to we had 2 questions, one about gut and bone health, and then one about, mindfulness, gut health, and, blood glucose balance. I'd love for you to speak specifically about, gut health and how it plays a role in blood sugar balance, and then if we could talk about gut health and how it plays a role in bone health, which I know was you had a lot of additions to the book on that topic.
I do. Um, okay, so bone health. First of all, if you don't have enough enzymes, if you don't have a dig in that's in pretty good balance, and you don't have enough stomach acid, you're not going to get nutrients to every single cell in your body. So that's the first thing. And so you can't have good bones if you don't have good digestion. The second thing is that in the duodenum, which is the first part, the first 12 to 18 inches of the small intestine, is where we begin to absorb minerals. And we need acid in there. So if you have low stomach acid, you're not going to be able to absorb iron and calcium and magnesium and zinc and a bunch of other minerals. And so you have to start going, okay, like, let's look at that. And I know for osteoporosis, we spend a lot of time focusing on calcium and vitamin D, and they're really important. But magnesium is almost as important. We have at least one Israeli study where they gave women with osteoporosis either placebo or 400 milligrams of magnesium every day for 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, the women who had gotten magnesium with no calcium or vitamin D had a 3 to 5% increase in bone density. And the women who got the placebo had a 1 to 3% decrease in bone density. Now, one of my friends and colleagues, Dr. Susan Brown of betterbones.com, she a long time ago came up with this idea that there are at least 21 different nutrients and components in food that are involved in bone health. And so, it's not a simple kind of role. We also have some really interesting research, which I can't remember well enough to kind of give all of it to you. But it's very interesting because serotonin, which is manufactured primarily in the gut, plays a role in bone formation and bone cell destruction. And I'm not going to even go further than that. It's in my book, but what's interesting about it is that the serotonin that's made in the gut does one thing, and the serotonin that's made in the brain does a different thing. And so it's pretty fascinating to kind of look at that. Um, so those are just some of the ways that digestion plays a role. And we also see that celiac disease, one of the diseases that's highly associated with celiac is osteoporosis. So if you're working with somebody who has osteopenia or osteoporosis, you want to make sure that they've been screened for celiac disease by their physician, and just make sure that that's been ruled out. Or if you're using Vibrant America, you can order one of their panels and you can kind of take a look at that. I would caution about being careful about doing those kind of panels, because what happens when you, as a nutritionist, get back a panel that says somebody has celiac disease, what do you do with that information, right? What I would do with that information was I would send the report to their physician and say, I ran this looking for gluten sensitivity, but this is what showed up, and I can't make this diagnosis. Would you follow up? Because you really do not want to get into trouble for practicing medicine without a license.
That is excellent advice, and we remind them of that all the time. Even with A1C levels, you got to be really careful. It's not your job to diagnose. Well, we've got a couple specific follow-ups to that topic. Do you recall what kind of magnesium is used in aiding bone health?
I don't. I think it was just something pretty simple.
Okay.
Um,
And
so, magnesium citrate or something. And I don't think the type is so critically important, as well as use something that'll be well absorbed.
we've got a couple questions about support long term and in the elderly, specifically how to support stomach acid in the elderly using potentially HCl, or do you have any advice specifically in working with the elderly population?
With elderly, I'm very careful these days about using betaine HCl. I've had a couple of clients in the past who abused it and who started having stomach pain because growing ulcers in their stomachs. One of them had a real ulcer. She called me from the hospital. She goes, "I think the calcium that you recommended could be causing stomach burning." And I'm like, "How much betaine HCl have you been taking?" And, so maybe a decade ago, I started backing away from using betaine HCl and I started using more bitters, which people, they come in drops. People control exactly how much they want. I wish we had better research on bitters and how it promotes balance of stomach acid, but bitters are also antimicrobial herbs. They also are prebiotic. Generally they have a lot of health benefits, and they help with digestion overall. So I would start there. And then another food that I really like for helping support stomach acid is umeboshi plums, which are salted, pickled plums, and they're more like an olive than a plum, or a pickle than a plum. They're not sweet. They're really pungent, and they're what I found is that when people really need them, they seem to like them. And you can either just eat them out of the jar, or you can put it in a cup of boiling water and make tea out of it, or you can get the paste and put that on vegetables or fish or meat or whatever, you can, or grains. You can also get an umeboshi vinegar and use that. So I'm kind of using more gentle things. And at IFM, one of the ideas that we've come up with too is most of us don't have a Heidelberg capsule machine to determine whether somebody has too much or too little stomach acid. And so probably all of you have learned about using betaine HCl therapeutically as a trial to see if that helps somebody's symptoms. And I've used that for decades. But again, there's another thing that you can try that may work just as well and may be even more accurate, and that is to try this at first on yourself. Ask your clients to take a quarter of a teaspoon of baking soda in about 4 ounces of water first thing in the morning. And if somebody has enough stomach acid, you ought to see production of hydrogen sulfide, which causes people to burp. And so ask them to just kind of watch out for like what happens in the next 5 minutes or so after they drink that. Don't tell them what they're looking for. And I mean, I just told you, but don't tell them. And because the power of suggestion is pretty amazing. And just see what happens, and see at Liz from Erica. I've used that self-test often, but I haven't found research to support it. No, I haven't. Yeah, I like moonshine bitters, and I love uming too. Yeah. So, and you can even make your own bitters if you're looking for a holiday project.
Yes, we did that one year and it was a lot of fun. So I highly recommend it if you're looking for an activity. Um, and so, just for clarification, so if they burp, then they have enough stomach acid, or do they have low stomach acid if they burp?
They have enough stomach acid.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah, and Tracy wrote, ume is actually a type of apricot. It is. When you look at all the research, it's on umeboshi apricots. It's on apricots, but somehow when it came from Japan to the US, we call them plums. Just like we
So,
call dried plums, prunes, dried plums.
a question from a little while ago. How does the dance of dig in work with patients who are taking medications that cannot be immediately stopped? And how does the model concept work with conventional meds and conventional medical practice?
Okay, so I think mostly we have to just do our job and use food and lifestyle and supplements and herbs to support healing and balance. That's our job. And as we do that, I would stay in really good communication with their docs. Send out a fax. I mean, one of the best ways to build your practice is that somebody comes in to see you and they're on meds and or they have a certain health condition, and you fax to their doctor, I saw your patient the other day. She's seeing you for XYZ. From a nutritional perspective, here's the recommendations that I made. And here's why. And sometimes I used to even put research in. I put references in, and pretty soon those doctors are referring to you. They want to know that you know what you're doing and that you're science-based and that you're not going to undo what they're trying to do. That said, we have research on the 6-food elimination diet in people with eosinophilic esophagitis that demonstrates that like 73% of them in 12 weeks on the diet stop having swallowing difficulties, and on biopsy, their eosinophils are gone. My husband has eosinophilic esophagitis, and he just got scoped on Monday, and he's now, I think, 4 years with no eosinophils. Okay, so, and what he discovered was just a couple different foods that for him are really inflammatory. Um, so we also have on like the specific carbohydrate diet and low FODMAP diet, we have, especially with specific carbohydrate diet, we have research that demonstrates that the diet is as effective as using the biologics, and that it costs way less over time, which doesn't mean that somebody might not have a flare-up and need to take medications. But isn't our goal always to have these meds in reserve in case somebody needs them, but to lessen the severity and the incidence of flare-ups in people with autoimmune conditions, right? And so we're always trying to work within, and I think the more we can insert ourselves into the medical care team, the faster you're going to be able to build your practices and the more trust these docs are going to have of you. I remember once I started writing these letters, I was seeing a lot of people who had cancer, and I started writing these very careful letters to their doctors saying, here are supplements that can augment the chemo that you're doing. Here are supplements this person should not be taking while they're under treatment. Here's the dietary recommendations that I made. And the oncologist then called me up and they said, can you work in our office one day a week, right? And you know what happens once they have you one day a week, pretty soon they want you 2 days a week, and then pretty soon they want you full time. Because once docs get used to having one of us in their office, they can't believe how they ever existed without us. This morning I did a webinar for a clinic in Maryland, and they have health coaches from Maryland University of Integrative Health, and they have 2 or 3 nutritionists who are graduates of Maryland University of Integrative Health because they're only like half an hour away. I'm not slamming any of the other great programs out there, but the MD was interviewing me, Dr. Wong, and he's like, oh yeah, like this team approach, they can't function without it. And so you want to make yourself indispensable.
I think that's great advice. And I think so many new graduates are so afraid to reach out and to coordinate care. And it's something that you all know enough and you can. And it will lend you more work and more good to do in the world. Um, there was one other question. Oh, do you have any specific antimicrobials or combos that you really like to use or suggest, especially for, I'm assuming that question's in the around SIBO or potentially fungal overgrowth.
Okay, so Dr. Jerry Mullen, who's a gastroenterologist, actually compared rifaximin and some herbals head to head and published that um, a long time ago now. And so the products that he used were twofold. He used some biotics products, Epsicidal, and their oil of oregano product, ADP. And I think there might have been one other product. And then he used Metagenics, Canabactin AR and BR. And so I've used both of those protocols. I really like the biotics protocol, I think a little bit better, but they both work really well. And that said, every company makes a berberine product. Every company makes an oil of oregano with maybe other, aromatic oils. And so looking for combinations like that. And the protocol that he used was um, two of each product twice daily for 30 days. And so if I'm recommending these to balance the microbiome, right? We're not treating SIBO, we're not treating fungal overgrowth, but to balance the microbiome and help with symptom relief. What I'll ask people to do is I'll say, start really slowly, start taking one product and do that for a day or two. If you don't notice that you're having a die-off reaction or feeling worse in any way, then increase to two of that product and just kind of slowly increase. Because what you'll see is that if you recommend that people just start this all at once, 4 or 6 of these antimicrobials a day, that some people might feel a lot worse. And I think kind of a more yin or feminine way to do this is gently.
That's excellent advice. So we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure that
Oh, that went
everybody.
so fast.
I it did. It was, and this was absolutely delightful. I think a lot of our supervisors have heard me talking about the issues with betaine HCl, and I am applauding you for echoing what I've been telling them for the last few weeks. So thank you for that. And I'm just so thrilled that we got to learn from you tonight and to share this with our community. I do want to make sure that everybody knows this is just a small taste of what you have built for CNSs and other allied health professionals, and you have an entire course available if people want to learn more. Of course, hopefully everybody has the new edition of the book because it is a wonderful desk reference. But Liz, where should people go if they do want to learn more?
Well, the course is called The Art of Digestive Wellness, and you can find it at artofdigestivewellness.com. And when I was writing the fifth edition, I kept saying, oh, I wish I could talk about this. Or I'd like to talk about this research. I seen somebody said, where's that research about SCD versus biologics? So I have a whole section really on how do you discriminate. I have several lectures on how do you figure out which diet to use for somebody with GI issues based on current research. And I also have in there a flow chart, which took me weeks to kind of figure out how do I think about this, and I have a lot on fiber, on short chain fatty acids. I have a lot on the microbiome and dysbiosis and SIBO and SIFO and testing for GI issues. It's really a deep dive. There's 28 videos and there's over 40 handouts. And even if you're not ready to sign up for the course yet, it's $397, which I tried to keep the price reasonable so that more people could do it rather than like just a few people. But even if you're not ready, at least go to, and I'll put this in the chat box, go to download at least the digestive health appraisal questionnaire, which will put you in kind of my autoresponder, but it's a tool that you can use right away for your own health and for your client's health. And the website is www.dhaq.info. So I just typed that into the chat box, but it's a digestive health appraisal questionnaire and it goes through 15 different areas. Could this be gluten? Could this be liver gallbladder? Could this be leaky gut? Could this be SIBO? What might it be? And so it helps you kind of hone in on areas for improvement in somebody's health, including our own. So anyway, and also in the course, there is now 11 cooking demos. What I found is, like, I know all of you on this call cook, But you're going to find that when you're talking to people, sometimes you're going to say, I'd like you to cook. And they give you this startled, like, I'm in shock look, like, no, that's not possible. And what you're going to find is that with cooking demos or showing somebody how to cook, that they go, oh, that's easy, I could do that. And so I love unwinding at the end of the day and cooking. For me, that's part of my renew and replenish and rebalance. So, I try to make this a really robust course. So there's over 40 handouts, and let's see, there's 28 plus 11. So that's 39 videos. And for CNSs, there's 20 CEU credits. For dietitians, we've been approved for 21 and a half. For nutrition therapists, 24. And if anybody's from the UK, for people who are nutrition therapists in the UK, BANT has approved it also for 20 credits. So, I think it's a great course, and I had so much fun making it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you so much for answering all of our questions. And I'm also grateful to each and every one of you for joining us. I'm so glad we could all come together and share this work. And this is a lot of fun. And thank you so much, Liz. This is great. And everybody, I hope you can finish the book if you haven't finished it yet. Make sure you have it as a desk reference and check out her course, especially if you're about to become a CNS. You're going to have to start getting those CEUs. And if you're licensed, some states you have to get CEUs every couple of years, not just every 5 years. So it's always good to find good quality ways to improve your education while getting those CEUs. So thank you.
I see so many familiar names and faces. Thank you for all being here and joining with us tonight. It's been great.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your evening. Take care and join us in the new year for the rest of our book club series, cliniciansincubator.com.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.